Hi there, this is Solid Ronan from Solid Ronan Films, and welcome to another video. I thought it would be a fun exercise just to do my favourite 200 films of or Circa 2022, just a kind of update of where I am. Obviously some of these favourite films will always be in the favourite films list. Quite a few of them are new entries just because I've watched them in the last year or so. Granted, one of the downsides of having such a large backlog as I do, yes, there'll be films that will bounce into my favourite 200 films, but it means I haven't rewatched a lot of films that probably would be in my favourite films if I actually had time to rewatch films. So for example, there's a bunch of Brunel films that might end up in my favourite 200 if I get around to actually rewatching them. There's a bunch of Herzog. Obviously I have loads of Ozu, or Ozu even, in the backlog to watch. So it's just a bit of fun. Obviously there will be eternal favourites in here that will just never be out of my favourite 100 or favourite 150, or in this case favourite 200. And then there'll be ones that will just ebb and flow, but some of the new entries I think might stay there for a while, and there's other ones that might fall away if I ever do a definitive list. But to do a definitive list I would literally have to clear my backlog and rewatch huge chunks of my collection. But who knows, maybe one day in 2033 I might be able to do that. So again, this is just a bit of fun. Obviously there's a few cheats along the way, but this is my favourite 200 films as of recording this in May 2022. I'm going to split them into two videos, because doing one video would be not only torture for the viewing public, but also it would mean I would have stacks of Blu-rays that would increase the chances of me knocking them over. So let's just start with the letters A to K, and then I will do another video, the letters L to Z. So starting with A, a lot of these won't be a surprise to anybody. I'm going to start with my favourite Martin Scorsese film. And the actual letters aren't in alphabetical order. The films within the letters aren't in alphabetical order, but the letters are in alphabetical order, because that is the way the universe works. So this is Age of Innocence on Criterion. Like I've said many times before, it's my favourite Scorsese film. And as the years go by, it's my favourite Scorsese film by larger and larger margins over the rest of his work. Again, I'm not going to talk about the films too much. Next is Army of Shadows by Melville. I really need to get it on Criterion Blu-ray, the standalone Region A, instead of bringing out the box set every time, but it's always good to bring out a box of Melville. Again, Melville's another one that I really need to rewatch. All of his films again. Another one of his films will appear on this list between the letters L and Z. But whenever I get around to rewatching these films, I'm sure there might be another couple that might appear in this list at some point. Ace in the Hole, Billy Wilder, Kirk Douglas. Absolutely fantastic, 1951. The Apartment by Billy Wilder with Jack Lemmon. It's It's the nice Arrow Academy big edition. Attack, Robert Aldridge, Jack Palance, Lee Marvin, Eddie Albert. A really low budget but gritty and wonderful, with lots of great lines. Eddie Albert is the cowardly officer who always sends Jack Palance's unit off to get killed. Herzog's The Gear, Wrath of God. Again, like I mentioned in the intro, I really need to watch Herzog's films all over again. But this one always is in this list because it's just absolutely wonderful. Klaus Kinski, one of his career-defining performances. Next, Hal Hartley's Amateur. Absolutely adore Hal Hartley. His late 80s, early 90s indie films, which have far more influence than is ever really talked about. This is one of Isabelle Huppert's finest performances, and that says a lot. But great performances by Elena Lowenson and Martin Donovan, of course. Hal Hartley's Action Man. Next, Atom Egoyan's Adjuster. Again, for me, Atom Egoyan is an interesting test case that one day I will do a series on, because his career is literally a tale of two halves. The Adjuster doesn't get really talked about as one of the great films of the 90s, and it should, because it's absolutely amazing. Elias Koteas as a loss adjuster, a great Michael Dana score, as with a few Egoyan films. Maury Shaken with an absolutely fantastic performance. It is a film that's really underrated and should really be talked about in the great films of the 90s. Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous, certainly the extended version, but it's one of those films you could actually watch a 4-hour cut of and it would still work. It's just absolutely wonderful. The Act of Killing, arguably one of the greatest documentaries ever made. Again, this has 2 cuts, but watch the director's cut. And there's a commentary with Werner Herzog. Errol Morris was also a big fan of this. It's just an absolutely gobsmacking, amazing documentary. Satyajit Ray's The Apu trilogy, just wonderful naturalism from a director who had no training, but just made very naturalistic and painterly films. Criminally underrated, the director. Obviously everybody knows the Apu trilogy, but he has 5 or 6 other masterpieces. A lot of his films aren't actually available or in very decent copies. Blade Runner, one of the best films about mortality. Ridley Scott's finest film. I know that's not much of a stretch. Black Narcissus, depending on what day it is, this is my favourite Archer's film. Just absolutely stunning. The fact they didn't actually go to the Himalayas to shoot about a nunnery in the Himalayas. David Farrar's shorts, seminal. Deborah Carr, just absolutely fantastic, and the most devastating use of lipstick in cinema history. Not worn by David Farrar. Bringing Up Baby, this is one of those films that never got a Blu-ray until recently, which befuddled everybody. And this is one of Howard Hawks' best, with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. More of them a little bit later. It's absolutely wonderful, and probably a little bit more manic and madcap than you remember. Next, for me, my favourite Terry Gilliam and his best film, Brazil. Now seen in its proper version, not the Love Conquers All 90-minute version. This is Gilliam, I wouldn't say at his most focused, but it's just at his best in Jonathan Pryce, a career-defining performance. Kim Ji-woon's Bittersweet Life. Always like an excuse to show off the Bud Blue Steelbook edition. Absolutely wonderful Korean film. The Beast Must Die. Yes, I always like to trolley out The Beast Must Die. And then there were none, but with a werewolf. Calvin Lockhart's just absolutely fantastic in this. Anton Diffring. A lot more influential than people give it credit for. Bedazzled, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore's finest 104 minutes, directed by Stanley Donen. Blue Velvet. And yeah, it's kind of cliche, oh, Blue Velvet, ho hum. But when you actually watch the film, it's still dangerous and it's still disturbing. Excuse me. It's still disturbing. All the way back in 1986, and it's still more powerful than most of the films you'll see. Next is Le Boucher, which I still is from that with Stéphane Audran. This is one of the many great Claude Chabrol films that isn't available on Blu-ray. I mean, Arrow have done wonderfully well to release the 2 box sets, but we really need a box set of his late 60s, early 70s films, including this and The Man Must Die. Le Boucher is absolutely fantastic, about a school teacher in the country who befriends a local butcher, and bodies start appearing. Next is The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez, starring Edward James Olmos. This is one of the greatest films of the 80s that nobody talks about. This is one of those Criterion films that everybody should own. Again, I had never seen it until I'd seen it. And once I'd seen it, it absolutely blew me away. It's all about literally lost in translation, and the consequences of that, based on a true story in American history. It's an absolute masterpiece, and you should really just try and watch it. If there's one film out of these 200, well, there's a couple that I would probably say, but this is one of the handful of films out of this list of 200 films that you should really track down. Next is the Coen Brothers' Big Lebowski, my second favourite Coen Brothers film. Next is Butt Boy. Butt Boy changed my life. For such a low budget film, it looks like a Michael Mann film. It's actually turns into a really intense cat and mouse detective story between a very intense cop and the man he thinks is putting people up his butt. Not based on a true story, I don't think. Next is a slight cheat, but the whole Baby Cart, Lone Wolf and Cub series in this lovely Criterion set. They're all about 85 minutes long and they're all an absolute blast. Next, Howard Hawks again with The Big Sleep, Humphrey Bogart and Bacall. Baraka, the Kowatatsu type film, but I think this is the best one out of the 5 or 6 that were kind of made. You need to watch these films on a screen as big as possible, and they'll make you feel insignificant as an ant in the afterbirth of the Big Bang. Next, Paul Schrader's Blue Collar. I think this might have been my first ever indicator. Look where that's led me. There's another film in the discussion that I'll get to in a bit, but I think Blue Collar might have been the first indicator I picked up. Still relevant today, sadly, and will always be relevant, unfortunately. Next is a film that I just have on DVD disc, so I haven't fished it out, but it's Big Deal in Madonna Street from 1958. This is another one of those Italian discoveries that I've made in the last 18 months or so. Directed by Mario Monicelli, who will appear later on the second video, starring Marcello Mastroianni, Renato Salvatore and Claudia Cardinali. This is a crime caper comedy, which is absolutely wonderful. It is on Criterion DVD. Hopefully one day they will upgrade to Blu-ray, but it's an absolute blast, and you should try and see it if you haven't seen it before. Next is Szysłowski's Blind Chance. Probably my favourite out of these early fiction films. From 1981, obviously censored at the time. And it just tells the story of 3 different directions that a young man takes, ending in 3 different endings. Next is Come and See, a film that for ages was hard to see. There's kind of 2 moments or 2 eras in your life before seeing Come and See and your life after seeing Come and See. If you know anybody who thinks that Saving Private Ryan is the best war film of all time, sit them down and watch Come and See. Excuse me, as I have dropped one. Again, this is one I've only got on DVD disc only. It's Citizen X from 1995, an HBO TV movie, which looks it when you watch it in 2022, but it's absolutely fantastic, based on the true life manhunt and capture of the Russian serial killer Chikatilo, starring Stephen Ray, Max von Sydow, Donald Sutherland, Joss Ackland, directed by Chris Guillermo, who wrote Mississippi Burning. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a procedural. Yes, you have to put aside the fact that they're all supposed to be Russians, but you know, some of them put on accents, some of them don't. But it's really good, and it should get a Blu-ray. But again, it's early days of HBO, so I don't think that'll ever get a Blu-ray, sadly. And from serial killers to Clue, Jonathan Lynn's wonderful comedy based on the board game, which was absolutely slated when it came out. People are warming up to it. It's absolutely fantastic. One of Tim Curry's finest performances. And from Clue to Crash by Cronenberg. This is one of the 3 editions I have. And the other film that might have been the first indicator I ever bought, Charlie Varick, by Walter Matthau, directed by Don Siegel, with Andy Robinson. Just an absolutely wonderful film. Joe Don Baker is one of the scariest villains in cinema history. Next is City of Hope by John Sayles, in this homemade DVD copy, because it's the only way to see the fucking film. Next, another Italian masterpiece, Christ Stopped at Eboli by Francesco Rossi, starring Gian Maria Volonte. 220 minutes long. This is the kind of cut together version that was originally shown in 4 parts on TV. Again, I did a random review of this, and I've talked about it before as a film that kind of sums up the beauty of cinema, because there's no way this should be absolutely enthralling and riveting, but it is. As a writer who's sent out into the country in political exile and just hangs about a village for 4 hours or 3.5 hours, it shouldn't work, but it's just absolutely beautiful, and a completely different Volonte if you're just used to Volonte and spaghetti westerns. It's another Saijit Ray, Charulata, or The Lonely Wife, 1964. Another effortlessly, deceptively simple film, but absolutely beautiful. Simple story of the wife of a newspaper man who's bored out of her mind, and her cousin comes to stay, or the husband's cousin comes to stay, played by regular Samitra Chatterjee, and just their relationship of just like hanging about and getting to know each other. Again, deceptively simple, but that's kind of Saijit Ray's trademark. And then arguably my favourite blaxploitation, Cotton Comes to Harlem, directed by Ossie Davis. Yep, that Ossie Davis. It has arguably the best pairing of cops in cinema history. Gravedigger Jones and Coffin Ed, played by Godfrey Cambridge and Raymond St. Jack. Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones, I mean, two wonderful characters. Again, based in a Chester Himes novel, also starring Calvin Lockhart. It's so good. Again, another cheat. Decalogue, yes, it was a TV show, but I'm calling it a film. Doctor Strangelove. There won't be too many Kubrick films in this list, but this is certainly one of them. Clouseau's La Die Oblique. Dead of Night, probably the best portmanteau film ever made, aside from the slightly misogynistic episode of the comedy Golfers. This one is absolutely wonderful. It has the best framing story probably of any portmanteau. It just kind of is an endless loop for eternity. It's just absolutely wonderful. Cronenberg's Dead Ringers. This was the film that showed critics of him that he could make a grown-up film that wasn't all blood and guts, but in some ways this is actually more disturbing than his earlier quote-unquote body horror films. As you all know, I'm a little bit strange. This is my favourite Hammer film. The Devil Rides Out. Christopher Lee and Charles Gray in fantastic form. The fact that Christopher Lee actually plays a bit of a git in this, and he's supposed to be like the hero. Plus, yes, Minister's Paul Eddington. Next, The Dead Zone, one of the best Stephen King adaptations, strangely enough, directed by Cronenberg, and starring Christopher Walken, who might appear in quite a few films in my favourite 200. And this is the imprint, which I kind of had to pick up because it's got stacks of special features. Great early performance by Martin Sheen as well. More Shizlovsky, Double Life of Veronique. The first Die Hard is a tribute to Bruce Willis, who we might not see acting again ever. The first one is a template film, and it never really gets old. You can debate the sequels. Next is a Finnish film, Dogs Don't Wear Pants. This is the best film in the Anti-Worlds label so far that I've seen. About a father who tries to deal with the death of his wife by having S&M sessions where he's suffocated, and at the point of passing out he has visions of his wife. It's actually strangely romantic, but it's not for everybody, and the more times I watch it, the more I love it. Next is Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Again, some films don't really need an introduction. Juno and Caro's debut, Delicatessen, probably my favourite post-apocalyptic cannibal film. Again, another one that I just have the DVD disc of. Dreams of a Life from 2011, the Carol Morley docudrama following the life of Joyce Vincent, who was a woman who was found dead in her flat, pretty much melted into the carpet 3 years after she disappeared. Nobody checked up on her. This happened in London, and it's just a wonderful, sad, tragic story of somebody who can just fall through the cracks. Somebody who was very popular and had lots of friends at different jobs, but nobody ever just called her up to see how she was doing, and then she was found dead. And when they did find the remains of her body melted into the carpet, it was surrounded by Christmas presents to herself, which added an extra layer of happiness to the whole story. And for anybody who lives alone, it's a film that's just absolutely wonderful, because chances are we'll all be found melted into the carpet. Where are we? Devil in a Blue Dress with Denzel Washington, directed by Carl Franklin, 1995, based on a book by Walter Mosley. This should have really got sequels, because there's more. Easy Rollins is the character Denzel Washington plays. There's more Easy Rollins books. This is Denzel Washington at his best, I think. It sets the period really well, and it's just an absolutely wonderful film. I think Criterion are releasing that in a 4K maybe? Don't know about 4K, but I think Criterion are releasing it. Takashi Miike's Dead or Alive, just the first one, as more of a kind of a little bit of everything with Takashi Miike. If you had to show somebody one Takashi Miike film out of his 5,000 that he's made, probably Dead or Alive is a pretty good shot. It has just about everything. The opening 10 minutes is just ridiculous, and it has one of the greatest endings of all time. Next, Louis Malle's Elevator to the Gallows. This was his debut. He made at 24. It's like, what were you doing at 24? You probably weren't making an absolute classic of the new wave. Jean Moreau and Maurice Roney, again another great ending. Next is The Exorcist 3. This is the Scream Factory edition. This was, I think, along with Nightbreed, this might have been the first Region A that I bought, and I got Region A just to see The Exorcist 3. Not the theatrical cut, the director's cut. It's still a bit of a mess, but it's as good as we're going to get. George C. Scott, just an amazing performance. More a serial killer film with kind of supernatural bits, but absolutely chilling, pretty horrific, even though you don't actually see that much. It's a bit like Michael Mann's Manhunter. You think it's a much more violent film than it actually is, because you just hear about it, you hear the details. Again, this is the Arrow release. For me, Tim Burton's only film that has a true heart to it, Ed Wood. Not that not having a heart's a bad thing. But this is absolutely beautiful, and it's something that deserves a kind of boutique label release, because it is an absolute masterpiece. A love letter to the filmmaker, but also a love letter just to filmmakers in general, and anybody who has a dream. Next, Buñuel's The Exterminating Angel. My favourite Buñuel, but like I said again in the intro, very much like Herzog, I really need to rewatch his films, and there'd probably be more that would end up in the top 200. Les Yeux Sans Visage by Georges Franjau. Just an absolute nightmarish dream of a film with Alida Valli, Pierre Brasseur, Edith Scobb. Poetic, and absolutely horrible. And speaking of absolutely horrible, The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On by Kazuhara. This was a film that the amazing Daisuke Beppu talked about on his channel and conversations. Eventually saw it, and it just beggars belief. This, along with The Act of Killing, are the only two documentaries in my top 200, or favourite 200, sorry. This is absolutely madness, but there's no kind of explanation I can give to it without actually you just going and see it, because that old cliched argument of you have to believe it to see it, but you have to believe it to see The Emperor Naked Army Marches On. Next, Flash Gordon. I should say this is the third documentary, because this is a gritty, unflinching view of life on Mongo under the tyrannical dictatorship of Ming the Merciless. Mike Hodges, how he got this footage inside the palace, he must have used hidden cameras or something to get the gritty realism of life in Mongo and the struggles that people had to overthrow Ming eventually. Who knows whether he'll get re-elected at some point, but this is a gritty document of life in Mongo. But somehow they want to go back to New York for a few dollars more, which I now watch with different Volonte eyes than I did for the first 35 years of my life. Next is Frank from 2014 by Lenny Abrahamson, a film that I absolutely adored, so much so that I have both the Plain Archive editions. It's a film that is just absolutely wonderful. It's about wanting to be a star, but does that mean you have talent or not? Domhnall Gleeson stars as a talentless singer-songwriter who latches onto this band headed by, pun intended, Michael Fassbender as Frank, who wears this head on at all times. It's about mental illness. It's about literally a product rather than actually making art, but it's also about the recording process, especially of avant-garde music. It's got a wonderful soundtrack, and it's just an absolute joy. Maybe not for everybody, but it's absolutely fantastic. Next, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Again, it is weird that this doesn't have a boutique label release, because it's such an amazing film and such an important film. The Way the Gunfighters got a Criterion. Henry King, Gregory Peck. Only 84 minutes long. Doesn't need to be a second longer. Just absolutely perfect Western about the weight of expectations, the weight of being a legend, and the curse that follows you around for being the fastest gun in the West. Just an absolutely beautiful film, and again, a perfect example of economy. Next, Glengarry Glen Ross, David Mamet's Swearfest. Next, the best spaghetti western not directed by Sergio Leone. This is Sergio Corbucci's The Great Silence, with Jean-Louis Trintignant, Klaus Kinski. Just so many elements to it. It's in the snow, one of the great endings, great score. It's just a tremendous film. This also got a Eureka release recently in the UK. Jean Renoir's Grand Illusion, which I kind of go about 10 years between watching it, and then every time you watch it you realise how good it is. Next was probably the first release that has led me to buy quite a few imprints. The Gambler. I just love this film from 1974. Never had a Blu-ray before, and then when I saw the imprint had released it, it was kind of, I had to get it no matter what the cost. James Caan's best performance by a country mile. So 70s, and you know what that means in all its manifestations of what that phrase means. Just absolutely fantastic. And no, I have not watched the Mark Wahlberg remake. Next, probably my favourite, Wes Anderson, Grand Budapest Hotel. Next, one of the films that started me off on a Joseph Losey kick, The Go-Between, and also I'm starting to realise that I need to get more Julie Christie films, and I've actually got quite a few, more than I realised I had. But I need to get a few more Julie Christie films, and Alan Bates is brilliant in it as well. A Wonderful Study of Class, and absolutely beautiful, now it's on Blu-ray, The Go-Between. Next is Tsukamoto's Gemini, which is a period piece, but is absolutely stunning. Again, more Tsukamoto economy, not a very long film, doesn't need to be, but absolutely wonderful, dark and scary. Human Condition, doesn't really need anything more to be said, apart from apologising for not having seen it for so many years. Richard Lester's How I Won the War, arguably my favourite Richard Lester film, just an absurdist war film that just works on so many levels. David Mamet's Homicide, again another great film from the 90s that doesn't really get talked about, arguably one of the best American films about race relations. Joe Mantegna is absolutely fantastic. An early performance by Bill Macy. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. And yes, Michael Myers is in this film. He's on a television screen for about 3 seconds. So technically he is in the film. This is my favourite in the Halloween series, because it's not really anything to do with Michael Myers. Next, Holiday. Again, I've talked about this ad nauseum on the channel as well. This is the same director and 2 stars that would do Philadelphia Story the year later and get all the success. But for me, this is the better film, even though it's completely predictable. Doesn't matter, because Cary Grant and Hepburn are absolutely amazing. Next is Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain. I finally did episode 3 of my Jodorowsky series, which was The Holy Mountain, strangely enough. You can go check that out, as I fail miserably in trying to explain the film. Next is Kitano's Hanabai. Next, Ronald Neam's Hopscotch, a delightful little comedy with Walter Matthau, Glenda Jackson, Sam Waterston, and Ned Beatty, who almost steals the show. Tells the story of an FBI agent who wants to retire, but he's going to print his memoirs, and both the CIA, sorry, yes, CIA, not an FBI, CIA and the KGB both want him, preferably dead. Again, Mamet's debut, House of Games, just an absolute joy. Joe Mantegna and Lindsay Krause, and the whole host of Mamet regulars, Ricky Jay, who's sadly no longer with us. Just an absolute little gem from 1987. Another Hawks, His Girl Friday. Another Kobayashi, Harakiri. Do need to watch it again. Kurosawa's Ikiru. Another Don Siegel, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, just about perfect. Could literally watch this all day long. But people might think I'm a pod person. Another Francesco Rossi Italian masterpiece that blew me away, Illustrious Corpses, which again, as I said in my random review of the film, might be the greatest title of any piece of art. An album, a film, a book. Illustrious Corpses, I mean, come on, that is amazing. A bunch of judges are dying and Lino Ventura is put on the case. Max von Sydow's in it. It's absolutely amazing, from 1976. Completely 70s film, if you know what I mean. Denis Villeneuve's Incendie, which blew me away the first time I saw it and continues to blow me away. This is easily his best film. I mean, he's made some pretty good films, but Incendie just is a different level. Again, proving that I am a bit weird, this is my favourite Universal Monsters. It's The Invisible Man. Claude Rains is absolutely fantastic in it. The best use of a fist in cinema history. Oh look, it's another Italian film. This is Ilo Pitri's Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion with Gian Maria Volonte. That seems to be a common theme. Kind of reverse Kafka, not an innocent man being railroaded for a crime he didn't commit. This is a guilty man who happens to be a police officer, a fairly high up police officer, trying to plead his guilt. A wonderful little satire. Jack Layton's The Innocents, Deborah Kerr. Ivan's Childhood by Tarkovsky. Again, Tarkovsky is another filmmaker I need to rewatch his films, and probably another one or two might be in the top 200 if I were in a definitive list. Jaws, this would be the only Spielberg film that will ever be in a top 200. When he actually used to move the camera and do interesting things with the camera. Johnny Guitar, Nicholas Ray in this lovely yellow Eureka release. In True Colour. JSA, for me, Chan-wook Park's best film, starring two titans of Korean cinema. Another Kobayashi, Kwai-Dan. This is Eureka DVD, just because. And then this is the lovely Eureka Blu-ray release, which shows the power of the film, because in an attempt to get through my backlog quicker, when I upgrade to Blu-ray, I try and just have a quick look at the film, maybe watch the extras and then put it in the collection so it's out of the backlog, which I was going to do with this, but then when I got it I ended up putting it on to watch, and 3 hours later I'd watched the whole thing, because it just flies by. You're just immersed in such an amazing world building that Kobayashi does with the production design and the music. You're just sucked into the whole thing. John Woo's The Killer. Hard Boiled was the first John Woo film I saw in the cinema, which was an experience, but for me The Killer is his best. Yorgos Lanthimos' Killing of a Sacred Deer, perhaps not as great or not as much my favourite as The Lobster, but this is pretty damn good. And finally, for the 80k, King of New York, Abel Ferrara, with Christopher Walken, but Lawrence Fishburne and Giancarlo Esposito and Victor Argo and David Caruso and Wesley Snipes. Who else have I forgotten? Steve Buscemi. blistering film, top-notch walking. Yes, I'm a little bit biased. So thanks very much for watching. This was my favourite 200 films as of May 2022. Letters A to K. At some point I will do the letters L to Z. So thanks so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below what your favourite films between the letters of A and L are. And hopefully you'll join me again for the second half of this. A little bit of fun, but it's just a pin on the map to kind of see where I am in my favourite films as of May 2022. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.